So hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for our second in our series of lockdown podcasts, exploring colour astrology for the month of May. Now, unfortunately, we are unable to reach the studio to film our demonstrations due to the lockdown restrictions and give you a visual explanation. So we've had to improvise this month. Now, just to introduce ourselves, if you haven't joined us before, my name is Laura and I am the IT half of our flowery duo.
And I am Debbie, the floristry other half of our duo. Welcome.
Now, in our last podcast, Debbie, we explained what bug green says about you. If you are a May baby, as I am, you show traits of balance, strength and substance. As this is our second arrangement in our series, it covers funerals. So what is our design today?
So today, Laura, we're going to describe how to put together a grouped monochromatic design in a wreath shape. Just to explain, monochromatic means using only shades of one colour, in this case obviously green. It's actually amazing how many shades of green there are. Have you noticed while taking your daily dog walk?
I certainly have. All those new foliage and spring shoots. Bud green is so appropriate for May. You described our design as a wreath shape. Does that mean other shapes could also be used to create the tribute?
Oh, absolutely. You could definitely make it in the shape of either an open heart, chaplet, cross, or even actually a horseshoe. Anything, in fact, really, that enables you to achieve a grouped effect. Because by grouping the varieties, it enforces the shape and structure of the design. This tribute is actually quite set in its appearance, almost formal, I'd say. So, as mentioned before, it would suit someone who exhibited strength, substance and balance in their life.
Oh, that's great, Debbie. Right, let's get started. So grab that cup of coffee, get comfy and enjoy. So what ingredients are we using today, Debbie?
Okay, so let's start with our plant materials. I'd recommend green anthuriums, green spray roses, dianthus green trick, which is actually part of the carnation family. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with it, it actually looks a little bit like a sweet william without flowers. So it's entirely green, but still with that carnation texture to it. We'll also include some mollicella, you might know that better as bells of Ireland, some white Kahala roses, and aspidistra leaves and bun moss.
Well, that's a lovely selection of colours and textures. The white Kahala rose that you've mentioned, just to let everyone know, isn't actually white. It has a certain shade of green. What sundries are we going to use today?
So, firstly, we'll need the frame, which in this case is a bio wreath ring. We'll also need some stub wires. I'd recommend a 90mm wire, which you can then cut and bend into hairpin shape, or some 4mm mossing pins. That's actually to secure the moss with. And obviously you need your trusty floristry kit.
Now, I noticed that you're using a bio wreath ring, Debbie. We always try to be as eco-friendly and sustainable as possible. So could you use any other ways of constructing this while still being sustainable?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, Laura. You could use a wire wreath ring and bind with moss, or you could make a moss-filled ring of chicken wire in almost a polo mint shape. Although the wire ring and chicken wire are not biodegradable, they are sustainable because both the frame and the chicken wire could be reused.
That's great, Debbie. So as we always do, I know the routine by now, lay out all the plant materials in variety groups on your workbench once they have been conditioned at least overnight with your tools close to hand. How long do you pre-soak the bio frame for?
Yeah, you really don't want to over soak it because they become very fragile and brittle. So I'd suggest fill the sink with some water, lay the bio frame wet foam side down in the water for literally a few minutes. That should be sufficient.
And if you're using moss, how would you make sure it has enough moisture?
Yeah, so spray the moss with water when you're preparing it for the wire ring or the chicken wire polo. And then I'd spray it once again once you've mossed up. Your plant materials will actually draw the moisture they require from the moss, so it needs to be as saturated as possible.
So we're ready to place the fresh flowers and foliage into the frame. So where do we start?
So place the anthuriums in groups of 3 if they're kind of a medium to large size, or 5s if they're really tiny ones, and pop those at opposite sides of the wreath to each other, so you have 2 groups or clusters. Then use the dianthus green trick to form another group on one side of the anthuriums, and then pin moss to the other side of them, making another cluster. So in effect, you have 3 clusters of 3 different varieties of plant material. Okay, make sure you don't have any gaps in between your groups. You need to repeat that on the other side of the wreath as well. So you've also almost got a mirror image either side of the ring.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just to make sure I've got this right and clarify with our followers, you will in fact have 3 groups of plant materials on one side of the wreath and another matching set of 3 groups on the opposite side of the wreath. Is that right?
That certainly is, Laura. I do wish I was able to demonstrate this for our followers in our studio.
I agree. I'm really missing our studio, and especially the flowers. Can't wait to get back. Pictures and words are not quite the same as the real thing. Anyway, let's get back to it and not get too sidetracked. Once we are happy with the placements, what do we do next?
So next we'll add the spray roses immediately next to the dianthus green trick. Again, keep them in a tight group formation, then repeat the process with the Kahala roses beside the moss. Keep working the design principle at opposite sides of the wreath, remembering to maintain balance in group size and in structure.
So just be sure I'm keeping up. This means that you have a total of 10 different group sets of flowers, foliage and moss in the wreath so far, which means we haven't used the Molicella or the Aspidistra leaves yet. What are you going to do with these?
Absolutely right, Laura. I'm glad you're keeping up. Because the Molicella and the Aspidistra can be used to cover any gaps and hide the mechanics, that's what we're going to use. So cut the Molicella. You also might know it as bells of Ireland or even shellflower. Cut that into small pieces in between the bells, as it were, and place them, again grouped, in the gap left between the roses and the spray roses on one side of the wreath. You can also actually use some of the pieces to hide any gaps under and around the anthuriums if you have any.
So from experience, Debs, I've noticed that Molicella is quite prickly and can be quite irritating to the skin. Could you substitute it with something else, or is there any precautions you can take to avoid any allergic reactions?
Actually, that's a really good point. Personally, I've never had a problem with Molicella. However, if you do want to use it and want to be on the safe side, use a barrier cream and protective gloves. Alternatively, you can replace it with some green hypericum or maybe even some little echeveras.
Ah, that's a good advice. So just leaves us with the Aspidistra leaves. What are we going to do with these?
Take the Aspidistra leaves and strip them into ribbon-like pieces that are about 4 centimetres in width. Then make leaf loops from the strips and wire with a double leg mount. I gave an explanation of a double leg mount in our previous podcast, so just refer back to that if you want a better explanation. Place these in the remaining gap on the wreath, once again in a grouped form.
So that would be the finished design, Debbie. Quite a tightly arranged tribute, but each variety showcased in its own individual group. I can see why you'd need a variety of different textures, especially with the shade being the same colour. How far in advance could you make it up, and where would you store it?
So you could actually make this up a couple of days in advance, as long as it's well watered. Don't place it anywhere cold though, as anthuriums are tropical and they prefer a slightly warmer, sort of more domestic environment.
So would the same rule apply if you were using one of the moss options?
Well, As there wouldn't be such a good source of hydration with the moss as opposed to the wet foam, I'd make it up the day before. Bear in mind that the plant materials will have been wired into the moss. I therefore lay the finished wreath on a tray with some water for the moss to soak up overnight. Make sure it's removed though from the tray in good time before delivery to prevent dripping.
That's a good point. We don't want any puddles. My puppy has caused enough of those. Honestly. Well, this draws our second podcast to an end. I hope you've all enjoyed it and it's inspired you to have a go once life returns back to normal, hopefully very soon. Look out for our
definitely
podcast in our colour astrology series, which is home decor inspired. What are we creating next, Debbie?
So next up, Laura, it's an artificial foliage wall. So fantastic, really, for introducing some green into your home.
I look forward to it. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcome you back again very soon. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Stay safe and keep well. Bye.